Hi, folks. Welcome back. This is part 2 of our long-ass episode on attachment disorders. Hopefully, you had a chance to listen to part 1 first. You really need to listen to part 1, or this is probably going to be very confusing. What do you think, Dr. Shiloh?
Yeah, it is certainly your prerequisite episode to listen to for this one. And this is getting super interesting. I mean, we laid the foundation with attachment styles and attachment theory. Now we're going to get into the disorders that are out there and then just kind of follow this rabbit hole where it's taken us.
Exactly. And one of the things that might be interesting to think about for our listeners, or maybe even discuss when we have a chance to do a live stream, is the idea of these actual disorders and how they might apply to the examples we gave in yesterday's episode. So let's graduate from insecure attachment styles to attachment disorders, or rather, we're going to take a look backwards at where disorders form. And there are only 2 officially that are included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That is reactive attachment disorder and disinhibited social engagement disorder.
So let's first look at reactive attachment disorder. This is a whole different level of disordered attachment. Reactive attachment disorder is a rare but serious condition where an infant or young child struggles to form healthy bonds with the parents or caregivers. Reactive attachment disorder usually starts in infancy, and there's little research on signs and symptoms of anything beyond really early childhood. It actually remains unclear whether it even occurs in children older than 5. So this diagnosis is made pretty early on. Reactive attachment disorder can happen when the child's basic needs for comfort, affection, and nurturing aren't met, and stable, loving relationships with others just aren't developed. And I think, in a sense, that's really putting it too lightly. Sometimes they talk about it like that in the literature. Generally, this is going to be due to high levels of neglect, abuse, or frequent changes in caregivers. The combination and severity of these factors directly impacts the child's inability to form healthy emotional bonds. However, most children who are severely neglected don't go on to develop reactive attachment disorder. Remember, we're still taking into account that humans and even children and babies are incredibly resilient. So children with reactive attachment disorder often show emotionally distant behaviors towards their caregivers and have difficulty managing their emotions. This can sometimes appear as aggression or violence, and to cope, they might even pull away from interactions with their caregivers, rarely seeking comfort when upset, and showing little to no response when comfort is actually offered. Basically, the behaviors of the children fall into 2 categories. The first is social and emotional disturbances. So this is unexplained irritability, sadness, or fearfulness during non-threatening interactions with caregivers. And then the other is aggressive or violent behaviors. Some children, even this young, with reactive attachment disorder, may display aggression towards their peers, animals, or even themselves, often as a result of unmet emotional needs and an inability, of course, at this age to process really complex emotions. With proper treatment, children with reactive attachment disorder can learn to build healthier and more stable relationships. Treatment often focuses on creating a safe, nurturing environment and encouraging positive interactions between the child and caregivers. Counseling and education for parents or caregivers can also play a really key role in supporting the child's development and is absolutely key. So, children who grew up in Romanian orphanages often had trouble adapting to their new lives after being adopted, and MRI studies found that these children had smaller brains than average children. So just like a footnote to show how impactful this can be.
Right. For those of you who aren't familiar with that particular reference, it's one of those really difficult examples of we got a lot of research information from an absolutely horrific event. And this was without going into the whole history of why there were so many children in Romanian orphanages, because that's a whole other story. What happened is that these infants and toddlers were placed in environments where there wasn't enough staff to pay attention to them at all. So infants were basically wrapped in swaddling. They were fed, they were kept warm. their diapers were changed, but there was no body contact and there was no attention. And there was also very, very little stimulation. So the kids, as adults, I mean, now historically, we have figured out that there's a lot of developmental issues. I mean, it's interesting because the nurture informed the nature, as it were. Basically, the
Mm-hmm.
lack of stimulation actually caused these individuals to have noticeably smaller brains than average for children at that physiological developmental stage. So again, if you want to go down a crazy, crazy, but fascinating research hole, just go to the Wikipedia page for Romanian orphans and read on that. It's fascinating. Now, the good news is that there are some evidence-based interventions for RAD. But while I'm just going to quickly in a bit rattle off a few of them, I want to be really clear about treatment. And this is for anybody that's out there that is the parent to special needs children, to people who have relatives that are parents of special needs children, or somebody that's witnessing a meltdown in public of which you may not have any idea of what's going on. This is not a walk in the park. None of these treatment modalities is a magic wand to fix it. It's a slog, at least the ones that I've witnessed, although I have seen really, really fantastic outcomes. It's not easy for the parents. And being such a stressful experience for both the parent and the child has to be understood that it requires a total buy-in from parents or caregivers. Both parents and clinicians are going to face really unique challenges because they have to navigate a very complex and emotionally charged process of healing. And as we've discussed so far, RAD is rooted in early trauma, neglect, or inconsistent caregiving. And it leaves the children with deeply rooted trust issues and difficulties in forming, even understanding healthy relationships. The treatments are not about bandaging a wound. It is about demolition of some faulty emotional foundation work. So parents that are trying to help a child with RAD are often caught in a tsunami of emotional ups and downs, a literal emotional roller coaster, if you'll be patient with my massacring of etymology and metaphors at the same time. Kids with RAD can push caregivers away while simultaneously needing them desperately. So it's a confusing push-pull dynamic for the kids that's just exhausting for everyone. And it's not uncommon for parents to feel rejected or blamed for behaviors that they can't control or fix overnight. And sometimes the pushing away of any attempts at healing is a misfiring of defense mechanisms that individuals engage in because chaos has become the baseline for the kids. Techniques like attachment-based parenting require consistency, patience, and empathy, even when a child exhibits RAD behaviors like lying, stealing, aggression, and the child's resistance to closeness that stems from early trauma can make parents feel like they're pouring love into a bucket that has a hole in it, right? So they need to manage daily life like school, work, and it's easy to see why the burnout becomes a real concern. And in saying rejected or blamed, I don't want to minimize the impact that all of this has on a harried and exhausted parent. The parent is trying to follow a prescribed treatment protocol, manage their kids' explosive or angry, damaging behaviors, and then manage their own adult reactivity to it. That's so much. And that's like something that an outsider cannot see or understand. Like if you're
Yeah,
seeing, it's just so easy to throw off judgment on how kids are being parented in your view when you just see something happening at Target or Costco or in a parking lot
totally.
or a restaurant or on a plane or something, right?
Yeah, I also want to say, I mean, Scott is talking about how difficult this is. He doesn't think it's RAD. He's using the acronym, if we hadn't used it before, for reactive attachment disorder.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That's
Just
okay.
that's the acronym for it. And instead of like us kind of garbling our words, it is known as RAD. So clinicians working with RAD face their own set of challenges. And that, of course, makes sense because every child's experience of trauma is going to be unique to them, meaning that there can't be a one size fits all treatment. It just doesn't work that way. And our culture really loves the idea of a single, easy as pie, magic wand treatment. It doesn't work like that. Modalities like dyadic development psychotherapy, trauma focused CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, or attachment and behavioral catch up can offer templates and frameworks, but carrying them out requires a good bit of flexibility and creativity to meet that particular kid's needs. As an additional challenge, RAD often comes with a side order of other behavioral or emotional challenges like ADHD, generalized anxiety disorder, or even conduct disorders, making diagnosis and treatment a really layered puzzle. As we've referred to in the past, diagnosing children is a challenge, and it should be a challenge because
Yep.
quick diagnoses of children, at least to me, is just always a sign of a clinician phoning it in. Clinicians have to tread carefully with parents, ensuring that they feel supported but not blamed, as unresolved feelings of guilt or frustration can create roadblocks in the treatment process. All of these approaches demand long-term commitment, and that can be tough for families juggling other responsibilities or dealing with financial strain. And the reality is like we're incredibly lucky here in Southern California. Like we have so many resources within our schools even to help with these types of things. And there are areas of our country that don't have anything like this at all, and parents struggle. There's also the idea of cultural challenges that stem from class, from socioeconomic status, from age and such. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had to have really tough conversations with parents who refuse to accept diagnoses, and then those that get caught up in diatribes that begin with, well, back in my day, we didn't have any of this nonsense. We didn't
Oh
have all this
gosh.
autism stuff. We didn't have all this reactive attachment disorder. They just want to kind of have
Yeah.
a very closed view of it. But most of these treatment modalities require parents to be active participants. And of course, that is going to feel uncomfortable if trust between parent and child is already shaky from the precipitating behaviors. So, building a therapeutic alliance with a child who struggles to trust can take time, and lots of it. The progress can be slow, like glacially slow. And it can also be nonlinear or recursive. And that can leave exhausted parents and clinicians questioning whether or not their efforts are working. Patience is the key and one of the many challenges. So now that I've expanded on the challenges, there are really, really great success stories out there. Amazing breakthroughs happen when a child starts seeking comfort, making eye contact, or expressing affection. It's a game changer. So healing from RAD is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And while the journey is going to be really tough, the possibility of success will literally alter the path of the kid's life. And that is well worth it. So just without going too far into it, like dyadic developmental therapy, it focuses on enhancing the relationship between the caregiver and the child, and fostering that sort of nurturing environment that may not have been there initially, and it focuses on the importance of creating positive interactions. Dyadic development, I think, is also the one where there are periods, especially in older children, where the kid has to sit between the parents hours a day. Like if we're
Mm,
going to eat dinner, if we're going to watch television, you're sitting between us so that actually our bodies are touching, which is
yeah.
very fascinating, right? Like I'm sure some people would have like an absolute terrible reaction to that. Like, oh, what a terrible idea. But what you're doing is you're rewiring a person to understand that there's trust and safety in the containment of the relationship. It's fascinating stuff.
And with all of these, I mean, sometimes we're defaulting to the term parent, and often that is not the case that it's a biological parents, right? Because these
Right.
children are not still with caregivers who are the ones who have really significantly abused them. So these can be foster parents, adopted parents, other caregivers who are now doing all of this rewiring with the child that they are caring for.
Right. Another one is attachment and biobehavioral catch up. And that, again, it's going to help the caregivers provide nurturing care even when the child doesn't ask for it. And it focuses on the kid having more self regulation skills. Then there's parent child interaction therapy. This one is absolutely fascinating to watch. At my master's level training center, we had two-way mirror sessions where we would watch people being given instruction on how to interact with their kids. Now, ours
Um,
was done with an old timey phone, which sounds incredibly archaic, I know, but there are really incredible videos online on YouTube of people engaging in parent child interaction therapy where parents have like a Bluetooth microphone in their
mhm.
ear, and
Yeah.
there's a clinician outside the mirror, coaching them on how to give their kids praise. And this one is actually done with the parents who basically, because of their own upbringing, really didn't have any parenting skills.
Sure.
And the transformation that happens is unbelievable. Like you just see the kids break into these huge smiles when they get a compliment and immediately just launch themselves physically
Aw.
at their parents for a hug. The parents are just, they're emotional in the interviews afterwards because they're sharing, now I see how powerful this was. I wish I had had this, but I definitely want to
Wow.
have this, for my child. Then there's also trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And this one is really important and different from the other ones because it's looking through that window of children who have experienced trauma, and it integrates trauma sensitive interventions with cognitive behavioral techniques that are at the level the child can understand. And the idea there is to reduce trauma related symptoms. So if you reduce the symptoms, then you can go do the foundational work. So many other things involved here. You have to have an assessment that is really comprehensive. It can't be a 15-minute interview by telehealth with a nurse practitioner who has no background in
No,
this. Like you
no.
can't have that. You have to have caregiver involvement. Like you pointed out so beautifully, it's not necessarily going to be the biological parents. Maybe the biological parents have realized that what they were doing was neglectful or abusive and they're being allowed back into the process. That's always great. Our studies show as much as we have a reaction to, or you know what, I won't even generalize it to other people, my bias, which is incorrect. I have an incorrect bias that I am sharing.
Hmm.
My incorrect bias is to say, take the kid out of that environment, get them out, don't let them back in. Maybe that's because of my own avoidant attachment style. That could be it. Because the studies show that generally speaking, children will do better in their biological environment if the offending behaviors, if the aberrant or the unhealthy toxic behaviors can be modified. And we have to hold hope
Right.
that they can if we can
That
get
people can
buy-in
do
from the
better.
parents.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Learn
people
better skills.
can do better. So caregiver involvement, so important. And then we have to be really careful of falling into the habit of coercive therapies. This might sound obvious at first, but therapies that are labeled as coercive do exist. So controversial treatments that lack empirical support, like holding therapy, are not recommended and can be harmful. Do you know what holding therapy is?
I do. Why don't you explain it?
Holding therapy involves a person, usually a parent, holding their ASD child tightly in a way that ensures eye contact between them. And allegedly, the aim of that was to deliberately provoke distress in the child until the child needs and accepts comfort. It's kind of weird
Mm,
to think that this was actually an approach
I know.
today, from what we know.
It's like, let's take learned helplessness and hold this child down until they just sort of give into it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with anything, right? Interventions really need to be evidence based. And even more
Mhm.
so in this case, holding therapy is not evidence based.
Yes, clearly.
And the interventions need to focus on creating that supportive and empathic environment for the child. If you're interested in looking up more information, the legitimate sources we suggest are the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the Mayo Clinic, and the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. This episode is just making me so grateful for the work that people who specialize in child psychology and psychiatry do. Because, man, what a really tough road some of these can be. And I say it all the time, there's a mental health professional cut out for every type of work there is. And I'm just so grateful for those that are drawn towards this type of work. The prognosis on RAD indicates that with early and appropriate intervention, children with this disorder can develop healthier attachment patterns and improve their emotional and social functioning. However, without treatment, RAD can lead to persistent relational difficulties and an increased risk of mental health issues later in life, as well as the acting out, violent, or severe behaviors that we've highlighted already. So again, treatment and early identification and then
Yeah.
intervention, so important. Research shows that attachment disorders in juveniles behavior generally falls into three categories. So typically we look at antisocial conduct, which is like lying, stealing, manipulation. We look at aggression. Both verbal and physical aggression are common, especially when children feel threatened or abandoned. And then we look at emotional dysregulation. Are there extreme outbursts? What's their impulsivity like? The difficulty of forming friendships because of the emotions that go along with that. So let's quickly examine a couple of real life cases based on behavioral patterns commonly associated with attachment related issues. So not all disorders necessarily, but at the very least, insecure attachment styles, or perhaps there's some suspected attachment disorder going on here. So, first one is the case of Mary Bell from 1968 out of England. At age 10, Mary Bell was convicted of the manslaughter of two boys, age 3 and 4. The murders involved asphyxiation and acts of mutilation. So, in terms of Mary's attachment background, she grew up in an abusive household where she experienced neglect and was exposed to violence and exploitation. Her mother was reportedly physically and emotionally abusive, contributing to severe attachment disruptions. And then behaviorally, Mary exhibited a lack of empathy. She showed greater impulsivity and an inability to form meaningful social bonds, which are all hallmarks of disorganized attachment.
One of the things that's really fascinating about the case of Mary Bell that maybe at some point we'll be able to expand on is that after she had committed these crimes, she went to the home of the parents of one of the boys and just very innocently asked where they were, asked about what had happened, knowing that these parents were distraught, knowing that she had killed them because she was basically getting stimulation from this act of cruelty. So was that learned behavior from the emotional and physical abuse that she experienced? It's hard to tell at this point, but it is very interesting and very uncommon. You don't see that type of abject cruelty in children. Eric Smith, 1993, USA. At age 13, Eric lured a 4-year-old boy into the woods and killed him by strangulation and blunt forced trauma. Smith reportedly endured bullying and emotional neglect, and this may have contributed to feelings of alienation and anger. The home environment in which he resided may have aggravated his difficulties in forming secure attachments. And then the noted behavioral traits that we have access to are indicated as isolation, anger, and really an inability to connect with his peers. And all these three definitely would be indicative of attachment disturbances. All right, so the other diagnosable disorder under attachment disorders is disinhibited social engagement disorder. It's also diagnosed in childhood. In this case, the child lacks appropriate nurturing and affection from parents for any number of reasons. Emotionally unavailable parents to just full-on intentional neglect. As a result of these unfulfilled needs, the child is not closely bonded to parents and is as comfortable with strangers as they are with their primary caregivers. That could be maybe seen as an advantage, but we could also see how that could absolutely be problematic, right? It's not good to immediately trust everybody in your environment as a child. The symptoms can look like this: no fear of adult strangers and no shyness when meeting new people for the first time. Behavior that is overly friendly or talkative to strangers, including hugging or cuddling of unknown adults. Another way to look at this is that there's no hesitation around strangers, even when departing with an unfamiliar person. This individual does not look to parents or their caregivers for permission to approach strangers. So it's like this defense mechanism that we just assume is normal in children just doesn't exist at all. And you can see already in this description how it can be problematic. Symptoms like this can continue into the teenage years, where clearly that can get you in a lot of trouble,
Sure.
especially as a young woman, right? But the condition is not known necessarily to last into adulthood. There are some similarities with RAD in terms of the etiology of the disorder, but the child with RAD is not necessarily friendly with unknown people. And as far as risk goes, infants and young children between the ages of 6 months and 2 years are more at risk of developing DSED if they've been institutionalized. And as far as risk goes, infants and young children between the ages of 6 months and 2 years are at more risk of developing DSED if they've been institutionalized, for instance, after being abandoned or left in orphanages after the loss of birth parents, or if they spent time in changing or inconsistent family environments like foster care. I think it's really important for us to note that although most of the research has been done with children who were in foster care, by no means do most children in these situations end up experiencing DSED. The data shows that about 1/4 of young children in foster care develop this disorder. So it's higher than it should be.
Yeah.
It's higher than we want it to be, but we're not saying just across the board that all kids in foster care will develop this. There are parts of the research community that specialize in this area that question whether or not DSED should continue to be classified as an attachment disorder, because there's a camp that asserts that the indiscriminate friendliness exhibited by these children is thought to be independent of the child's attachment or lack of attachment to primary caregivers. So there actually is a diagnosis that has to do with brain structure that
Hmm.
puts some children more at risk of this. And we won't go into that because it's fascinating. Law and Order, I think, has done like 2 or 3
Oh
episodes
my
about
gosh.
kids that get trafficked because they can't discriminate like this. But it's another area that'll be determined by more robust research.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think it's so interesting to know, like, this is a window inside of imposter syndrome and just even this far into it, sometimes how much I second guess myself or ourselves that we're putting this outline together and I'm having to Google, do attachment disorders exist in adults? Because I had to like recognize that really the only two disorders are in children. And beyond that, we're talking about styles that are impacting adult behavior. But when we're talking about DSED and it said that really like this isn't a thing necessarily in adulthood, I think it speaks to the power of how social norms then start to shape our behavior at a certain
Yes,
point, right? Because
absolutely.
as adults, you start realizing like there are reasons I keep myself safe from people I don't know or strangers or just observe or be cautious.
Yeah, there's a bigger context. And like we've talked
Sure.
about, like the idea of personality disorders as also having flavors,
Yes. Yeah.
that may, or what is that flavored water that everybody laughs about where it's like,
Oh,
this
yeah.
tastes like lemon if the lemon was behind a dumpster 2 blocks away, right?
Like,
Uh,
yes. Any of the flavored waters,
any
really.
of those flavored waters. But the idea of people like falling into this trap of labeling themselves when they're in distress, like, is something wrong with me? Do I have borderline? Am I antisocial? Am I this? Am I that? And, the way we respond to that is that many adults, when under duress, when you are not in your best functioning or your best regulation, you may tend to exhibit something that is reminiscent of one of the ones that we used to say the word the cluster B.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you have antisocial personality disorder. It doesn't mean that you have narcissistic personality disorder. It means that when you're under a great deal of stress, this may be a default position that you take temporarily just to keep yourself safe. So when we talk about attachment styles, I feel like there's nuance to be explored in that way. I don't think we'd have to dig very far in the examples that we used just now with the kids and then in yesterday's episode with the adults to think that, yeah, the nature, the environment of growing up in these particular environments clearly is going to have an
Sure.
impact. Maybe it's not a full on result of a style that is permanent and unchanging, but certainly there's going to be an influence and something that is reminiscent of the
Yeah.
parameters we've been discussing.
Yeah. I mean, I really, I'm feeling more and more like there almost needs to be another episode or a part three or a bonus where, and I'm taking notes here on my white table of the overlap with psychopathy and personality disorders and then conduct disorder, right? In kids.
Right.
And especially as just, I'm going to talk a bit about some patterns of criminal behavior that are linked to attachment disorders. And I think you'll probably see very quickly how there's this concerning overlap to many of the criminals that we gave brief profiles on earlier. But generally, what we're going to see, and primarily we're still talking about kiddos here, juveniles, in terms of these disorders and how they're starting to act out. One very common one is theft and substance abuse, right? So a kid who repeatedly is stealing from stores, experimenting with drugs. This is going to be an indication that the child is really trying to figure out how to regulate their emotions and their behaviors. Not that they're having that very clear thought, right? But they're just trying to sort of control what's inside. So the theft, the substance abuse could be sort of searching for that control or coping for the type of emotional pain that they are experiencing that is absolutely related to those attachment disruptions, as we've
I
been
love that idea of
using.
attachment disruptions.
Me
That's a
too.
great phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great. It encompasses things that can be on, again, a spectrum of what's being impacted by non secure attachments. We also see property crimes. So, this could be a kiddo with a history of neglect, maybe setting some fires, citing feelings of underlying anger, maybe a little bit of a need for attention. Those can really reflect unresolved anger and disrupted attachments. Really, we want to look at like what is happening here in the thought process, the cognitive process of this child. Is the action the behavior for stimulation, or is it an outlet, right, for some inner turmoil that's going on, and it's being done by, hey, I'm going to violate these social norms, which is scary, right? It's sort of the precursor of conduct disorder, which is a precursor to antisocial personality disorder later down the line. So really, as much as it can be examined, teased out, and then understood what we're dealing with a child this age.
And again, so let's just riff on that for a second. So the idea that if there is knowledge that they're violating social norms, is that a distorted expression of autonomy? Because the healthy version of that as parents or caregivers or, engaged family members, aunts and uncles, is that we understand that kids have to learn to make their own decisions and they have to make mistakes and they have to actually experience consequences, and that the healthy version of that makes you a better person.
Sure.
But this seems to be like a distortion of that behavior, and it goes just beyond. And
Yeah.
are they going just beyond because they were raised in an environment where the baselines were off to begin with? It just raises a lot of questions, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this gets ramped up even more when we are talking about violent crimes, right? Violent crimes against people, where the rights of others are now violated. It's not just the social norms in terms of like property crimes or acting out, but when you are now crossing the line into injuring or killing someone else. So this could be severely injuring a peer in a fight, and then little remorse is shown afterwards. Insecure, avoidant, or disorganized attachment may underpin this lack of emotional connection that we then see. Remember, we talked about these attachment styles do at times impact the way people view themselves, but certainly also how they view others. So here's
Right.
a good example of how that's playing out in terms of whether there's empathy or remorse for this to even occur, and then after it has occurred. So like we were talking about Mary Bell, she committed these horrendous crimes, but then leveled up a little bit in the cruelty to kind of torture the parents. And then lastly, of course, kind of a hallmark, we look at animal cruelty, because that's sort of that in between of injuring or killing a living being that is not an adult. So this, for an example, might be a younger child who kills small animals in secret. And this behavior can often correlate with disorganized attachment. And with that comes a lack of empathy that can be stemmed from those abusive environments. It could also be a reflection of a lot of other things, right? I mean, kind of a schizoid presentation
Mm.
where we've talked before about that devoid of emotional connection to even the concept of life and suffering. So, we've seen interview after interview with children that have done this, where they say they killed the animals because they wanted to kind of see how all of that worked.
Yeah, that fascination with cutting the animal open and seeing it like as they're disconnected from the idea that it was a living sentient
Right.
being. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, well, I want to look at the mechanics inside as if it's just like sort of a machine in a way.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah. But, I mean, to wrap up with attachment theory, like with any theory out there, there are criticisms of it, mainly that it seems a little too simplified to assume that kind, honest, and respectful parents will then have kind, honest, and respectful kids. It's kind of like life isn't fair. Just
Yeah,
because you
it
do the
doesn't work
things
that way.
you're supposed to do doesn't mean it's going to turn out that way.
And also, I've seen absolute shitheels of people who have wonderful kids. So,
And vice versa. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah.
Additionally, I think it doesn't consider some other non-Western societies. And we kind of touched on this at the beginning, but there are cultures where child rearing duties are more evenly distributed among a broader group of people. And then, of course, others say that it really underestimates, again, the resiliency of people to overcome some really intense, non ideal childhood environments, as well as some other things. But those are kind of the biggies.
Yeah. And that sort of ties back to what we discussed earlier, the idea that not everybody turns out. There are people who come from absolutely horrific childhoods that I'm not saying that they don't have PTSD, but they may not have this additional baggage of really distorted attachment styles
Yeah.
that develop. So when we give some examples of this in entertainment, we've got some childhood and some adult examples. When we were putting together the outline for the show, you said we've already we've already used this example before, and we may have at
That's
200
okay.
plus
It's a good
episodes.
one.
Yeah, we may have. So I apologize, folks. But it's also for Shiloh and I that we gave up on The Walking Dead at various points just because it went off the rails. But we thought, the first few seasons was such a really good show.
I say it
And
time and time again, that pilot episode is one of the best pilot episodes
it's
of all
so
time.
good. And even Fear the Walking Dead's pilot was like amazing. Just the
Very
first
good.
episode is so great. And then it just like, but Walking Dead season 4 episode entitled The Grove, Lizzie Samuels. So Lizzie also now it's just amazing because she's like a 22-year-old actress who has been in so many other things since this, but this is really a challenging role for a child to take. Her character, Lizzie, exhibits behaviors that can be understood through the lens of attachment disorders and trauma really, really clearly, particularly disorganized attachment styles. She's erratic and extreme in her actions, and this suggests that she struggled to form a stable sense of trust or safety in her relationships. I mean, clearly, that's going to be aggravated by living in a post-apocalyptic world where
Yeah.
caregiving figures are inconsistent and dying all the time, and life-threatening situations are just the norm. So what the writers do really well is they create this character that shows a profound misunderstanding of relationships and emotional connection. And it can be that she over cares about certain people or certain objects while showing an inconsistent or lack of empathy and difficulty distinguishing reality from fantasy. Again, really good writing, really good acting.
Totally.
Lizzie has this belief that the walkers are the zombies, but I don't use the zombie word, that they're still people. And she just engages in dangerous actions that she keeps secretive for several episodes. And this highlights that she has an awareness that what she's doing is not going to be accepted by the adults that are really supposed to be taking care of her. And it shows that she's really has challenges navigating these social bonds, regulating her emotions and such. And those kind of behaviors really do align with traits that are seen in children with disorganized attachment. I don't want to go too far into it because I just think it's fascinating, but she has this weird giggly presentation towards one of the walkers that looked like he was like a good looking kid in his 20s before he
Hmm.
died. And, she feeds him on a regular basis. She'll feed him animals and stuff. And then they find where she's been dissecting frogs and she knows
Right.
that she's got to hide it because it's going to get her in trouble. It's a heartbreaking character arc, but really beautifully done. And just, I love the way that that's presented.
Yeah. Yeah. She's a great, like you said, a greatly written character. Somebody did their research. which was kind of cool when you see that.
Yeah.
I think one that comes to mind also is Norman Bates from Psycho. So we've seen several different adaptations of this over the years, some really, really good ones. Of course, he operates this secluded motel and kind of exhibits a split personality, right? He embodies himself. And then, of course, his domineering mommy. So it's interesting because
Norman.
the did I hear something? There's this theme, right, of this intense pathological attachment to his mom that stems from this really enmeshed, I think is like the hallmark of what we think of an
Yes.
enmeshed relationship in media. And then you and I are always like, wait, what are we doing pathologizing the mom? And what did the mom do wrong? What was that podcast we met in London? Don't blame the mother. Don't
Yeah.
blame. Yeah, lovely woman who does a podcast, and well, at the time we were in London, she was pregnant. So we told her we loved the name of her show because we're often saying things like that. But anyway, back to Norman. I mean, I think some people can say, this is the epitome of this development of dissociative identity disorder, but clearly he has not been able to form healthy relationships, and those attachments or lack of attachments have resulted in very violent behaviors, but he
Yeah.
hides under that influence of his mother persona.
Did you see the remake, the shot for shot remake with Vince Vaughn?
Yes, I did.
So huge controversy. A lot of people really, really hated it. I thought it was amazing. Anne Hesh, Vince Vaughn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm blanking about who else was in it. Viggo Mortensen was in it.
Yes.
But again, it was shot by shot, which was really kind of a fascinating thing. Was it Gus Van Sant? I think Gus Van Sant was the director. But what's different, Julianne Moore is in it too.
Oh,
But
yeah.
what's different is that he allowed the actors to have their own interpretation. So it wasn't like Vince Vaughn based his performance on line readings
Mm-hmm.
on the original Norman Bates in Psycho. And what you get to see, which I think is really well done by Vaughn, is just how odd Norman is, because the original portrayal. So Anthony Perkins has a great interpretation of this character. It's classic, and I have no criticisms of it, but I think that something that Vince Vaughn does in terms of attachment is that he's a little bit more obvious. It's
Mm.
like it's not quite so subtle, which I think is way more appropriate for someone that has dissociative identity disorder, that lives an isolated life, that has engaged in these types of killings before, has this fascination with death. Like, let's not make it quite so attractive, because Vince Vaughn is a good looking guy, but he's acting so quirky and buggy and weird.
Right.
It
Like
just makes it more sense.
yeah, like the social isolation would cause him to not know how to hide it very well. Does that make
Oh,
sense?
yeah. Great observation. Yeah. I love that. That's cool.
Mm.
So another great example, Tom Ripley from The Talented Mr. Ripley,
Mm.
now portrayed in a movie and portrayed in a miniseries. Both of them have great critical acclaim. The character was created by Patricia Highsmith. Ripley is a con artist and a murderer who assumes other people's identities to achieve his desires. The author paints a picture of a really troubled and emotionally neglectful upbringing that shapes Ripley's manipulative behaviors and his amoral personality. I think what is really cool, though, is that the movies build out this idea. Yes, he's manipulative and he's amoral. The movie builds out with Matt Damon desperately needing these attachments, almost like a Dahmer in the way. Like, I don't know
Mm.
how to make it work long term, but I need these things, or I need the accoutrements of this lifestyle. And then, of course, with the mini series, there's really a lot more psychopathic interpretation of the character that also is really great. But in the novel, Highsmith writes Ripley as an orphan from a very early age because his parents drowned in an accident when he was a child, and then he was raised by an abusive aunt. The aunt is described as emotionally abusive, and often belittles him, mocks him, and it's a toxic relationship. And it's meant to understand that this person has developed with a true sense of inadequacy and mistrust of the world around him. In the books, he's really depicted as a loner, somebody who seems never able to form any meaningful connections with anybody during his formative years. So he's also, and this is a great window that you get from the novels, is that he is really aware from a young age of his socioeconomic difference from the people that are around him. And he wants to escape that. He wants to be successful and have all of the bells and whistles that come with that. Interesting. I just, as I'm saying this, as I'm looking at our notes, the Tinder swindler kind of
Oh,
emerges as somebody
totally.
like that. The
Yeah.
idea that comes from this incredibly radically poor background and just creates this whole fantasy that he's able to keep
Yeah.
going over the years and taking advantage of people. But Ripley's childhood appears to align with the traits of disorganized or avoidant attachment styles because he demonstrates with a lack of trust. He can't form genuine connections. And also, he has this ability to manipulate others without any remorse.
There you go. Okay, I have one more, which makes, I mean, at first might be like, interesting, but makes a lot of sense after as much as you and I have talked about people who fake their own disappearances over the last few
Right.
years. So that would be Amy Dune from Gone Girl. So, of course, in the book or the film that people are familiar with, she orchestrates a very elaborate plot to fake her own disappearance that then implicates her husband as the one who has actually murdered her somehow. But both the book and the movie do a really good job of showing how her parental influence has started to shape some of her personality. So her parents are quite narcissistic, quite detached in terms of how their parenting style was, which tends to show how probably, her distorted thinking and behavior formed and is underneath kind of her very well put together presentation on the outside.
Yes.
So Amy's manipulation and her deceitful behavior obviously goes really, really dark, but it points to an anxious, preoccupied attachment style. There is the fear of abandonment, there is the desire for control. And that really tends to lead some extreme actions to maintain some sort of weird perceived relational stability in her life through doing this to her husband and to her family and to the media and the community. So
Have a chance to read the book?
I never read the book.
So I read the book first and enjoyed it so much. I may have even made these points before. I mean, I can't, if this is a spoiler, I mean, like if you haven't
Come
read the
on.
book and you haven't seen the movie, I mean, you probably have the concept of it. It's still worth, but if you haven't read the book and you haven't seen the movie, stop listening right now and go read the book.
Right now.
And like right now, because I'm going to give a spoiler away that is really fascinating. I thought it was really fascinating. First is like, she's such a brilliant manipulator. And Gillian Flynn writes this so well that in the first few chapters, you really don't know what's happening. You don't
Right.
know. I mean, it seems like it's all real, but then you start questioning everything like maybe her husband is crazy. Does the sister even exist? Nobody, like, because there are all these things of like he has these conversations, but nobody else is acknowledging the sister until they do. So there's like,
Yeah.
it's really great because it's very unsettling.
Yeah.
But one of the things that the movie does not elaborate on is, I mean, they talk about it, but you really get the impact of it in the books, is that her parents are so narcissistic, and Amy is such a narcissistic extension for them that she doesn't really exist except to fulfill their needs. And they're authors of children's books and they write books about her adventures. But then
Oh
there's
my
these questions
gosh.
of what did they set her up for? And she ends up really taking advantage of people throughout her life. She ruins several people's lives, as from when she's in high school all the way through college and young adulthood. And you kind of see a taste of it in the movie where he goes to interview people. But in the book, you see a much more terrible depth of what she does to people and just completely ruins their lives. And you realize that part of it may have been so that her parents would have something to write about, how
Yeah.
she overcame this awful thing that she actually set up. Very,
Jeez.
very interesting stuff. But again, like we're saying, in the big picture of all of this is that these attachment styles, if you think of them conceptually within a Venn diagram, there's overlap between personality disorders, neurodevelopmental issues, interspersed with like organic and traumatic brain injury, all sorts of things that come to bear to give us an understanding of these factors. It's just fascinating stuff.
Yeah. It's like we should never say nature versus nurture again. It's always nature and nurture.
I love that. I think that's
Yeah.
great.
All right. Let's copyright it, put it out, do something with it.
Trademark, hashtag
Trademark.
nature and nurture.
Oh my gosh. All right. Wow. Part 2. There we are, ending
There you go.
right at the end of the second hour. Nice. Well, coming up for you at the end of this month, we are going to release the live stream of our wonderful talk around Christmas time with the ladies of Rebel Tours out of London. So we talk with them about essentially the ethics of crime tourism and crime history,
Yeah.
and what they are doing about that with their tour company in London, specifically with a very popular tour that you will absolutely bump into on the streets of London if you are visiting, meaning there are so many tour companies out there doing it wrong and they are doing it right. And I will just kind of leave it at that to give you a little taste. Fantastic conversation. We can't wait for you to hear it. Anything else, Dr. Scott?
No, as we said, there's a lot that we need to build on from this episode. So look forward to, within the next couple of months, we're going to kind of dip our toe back into this and discuss the intersection with personality disorders and attachment styles, which I think would be fascinating because there's a lot more examples to pull from and discuss. And yeah.
Okay. Well, we will see you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Thanks, guys.
Bye, folks.
We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of the Crawlspace Media Network. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
Our theme music, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons Attribution license. Please check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube.
All of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Instagram at LA Not So Podcast, on X at LA Not So Pod, and on Facebook at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Once a month, we go live on YouTube on Saturday afternoon, so pay attention to our social media announcements to join our interactive broadcast entitled Behind the Couch, where we interview guests on a number of psych, criminal justice, and true crime topics.
And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, additional content, host interaction, and you'll be the first to know about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool swag.
Thanks for listening, and join us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential.